Brewing Conversation, live from Nicaragua. Dive deep into the world of coffee with co-founders of Twin Engine Coffee, Andrea Wolverton and Colin Ganley.
Welcome to Brewing Conversation, Season 0, Episode 10. My name is Andrea Wolverton.
And I'm Colin Ganley. And yeah, this is episode number 10. So this is the last episode of our sort of In the Womb series, where we're sort of giving background about how Twin Engine started, why, where, when, etc.
It's been a lot of fun for us to reminisce.
I need to stop saying etc. We're learning a lot about how we communicate as we're recording this. Because this is the first time we've ever tried to record a podcast, and you hear all your ums and ahs and et ceteras in my case.
And we're married, so that tends to add its own.
So not only are you critical of yourself, but you're critical of your spouse, which is, I guess, pretty normal. But the topic of today's podcast is getting started in Nicaragua. And we've already talked a lot about getting started in Nicaragua. So what we wanted to talk about today is when we actually finally stuttered, skipped, stopped, and started, and finally were able to actually roast coffee that we had selected and found and tracked down and dragged back, and then getting it out of the country, which took a long time. My memory is not quite as good as Andrea's, and so she was reminding me that when we were trying to get started, roaster was delayed, and we weren't able to get it in time. So what was going on? So we were living in León.
My pretend vacation time to find myself here was over, quickly disrupted. As it is, during that time, I had done quite a bit of sola, if you're in Spanish, adventuring up north to, in some case, just, roll up, knocking on doors. I had gotten a foundation in where the great coffees were, but then we needed to, find them.
What did you actually do?
So, I just remember, one person who's now a good friend now, I just took out driving. I left León. We were living in León, and I got in the car and just went driving north and said, okay, I'm gonna start in Matagalpa. Ended up in Jinotega, but just drove up to coffee beneficios, people's houses, which now that I kind of know the culture here is pretty funny. But at the time, I, was totally open, naive, and just looking for all these different varieties of coffees that we've now honed in on. But yeah, just knocking on doors, really.
Well, we knew that we needed coffee, and we knew that we could only take the best. And we tried to talk to these different beneficios, and we kept bumping into, basically, in my opinion, Andrea likes them better than I do, but I thought it was a brick wall. Because it was all these people who were just like, well, I'll sell you what I've got. Can I have some information about anything else in the area? No, I'll sell you what I've got. That's how I interpreted it.
Right, and we quickly realized that we were doing this new thing. There is no one that was a specialty coffee roaster, small in the country, wanting to buy high quality coffees. All of it was being exported.
So it was quite a challenge, really, and there wasn't a clear path. There wasn't this is what you do to find the highest quality producers in various
and here are the standards, and here are the prices, because everything is negotiated. Nicaragua is not a country that has a defined coffee differential, so it's not like Guatemala or Brazil. So every single transaction is a negotiation, which was rather interesting. It's based on the New York price, obviously, but.
Yeah, but you can't just ask for the price. It doesn't exist.
Right. And then there's a cultural aspect of that, of asking for prices here in general. But
you, in some cases, were driving around, knocking on the doors of homes where you knew that the person owned a coffee farm?
Right. And I also had no idea of security at the time. So then I would just roll down. I was in an SUV, and I would drive down, sometimes a decent road, most of the time, very rarely, and then somebody with a security guard with a pretty big gun, like, whoa, I'm from the country. That was not so shocking. I didn't understand the security measures. There's a lot of theft on coffee farms. It's not average. It's not common at all for a stranger just to drive up asking for the owner. And so I realized quickly, and in the end, I met a lot of really cool people that way. And here we are with some great coffee years later. But it was really funny to think about.
So back in Leon, we had, which is where we do the roasting, not where the coffee grows. Or very little of the coffee grows. We needed to get the whole other side of it set up because acquiring the coffee is one aspect of it. But the other aspect is roasting it, packaging it, doing everything in a hygienic way.
So commercial property that is ready to virtually does not exist.
No.
In Leon.
Not in Leon.
Maybe just in Managua and not even, that's a developing market itself. So it's people convert colonial houses to businesses in the center because the whole center is colonial houses that have been broken up over hundreds of years. And so
the lucky thing for us is that these colonial houses, and we've roasted coffee now, we're in our 5th year, and we've had 5 different facilities where we've roasted and packaged coffee. Mm-hmm. The good thing for us, for anybody who's producing a food product, is that luckily most of these houses are built with tile floors and a lot of really hard surfaces, which is actually fantastic for food production because it's very easy to keep it clean.
Right. So the culture for business culture outside of Managua, and I'm sure to some degree in Managua, is that you have a family home and generally the small business takes the front room of the house. So it's really, really common for the front room, the family home to be owned, and then the front room is a business, and then people live in the back. And so we were thinking, okay.
Yeah, so like if you're a lawyer and you've got a family home, then the front room, which would be maybe like a 20 by 25 room or something like that, pretty big, would be your secretary would be at the front door, and there may be a partition or there may not be, and your desk would be behind that.
And that would be the same for a physician, a little store,
sign maker, whatever.
Yeah, so we were kind of like, okay, well, we don't own, and people's properties have generally been in their family for quite a while, so properties either needed a lot of work, it was just, so anyhow, we eventually, we've been doing it in different places as kind of the ebb and flow of the business.
Do you remember the second place that we rented, the 2-story?
Yeah. So the second place was kind of deep into a neighborhood called an indigenous community, which is like a sub part of Leon in Sutiaba. And so that we needed a patio always because we roast outside. And so it was.
So we found this house that had a big backyard area and a paved patio. And so we found a way that we thought that would work. And it was a new construction, actually. But new construction typically in Leon is a cinder block structure with thin single pane windows, what have you. But the problem with this house was it was the only 2-story house on the block, which meant that almost the whole side of it was exposed to the sun all day long. So by about 11 or 12 o'clock every day, the walls were baking. They were like 110 degrees or something.
Yeah, we didn't even need a roaster. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't last in that place very
long. No,
we ended up bagging coffee in the kitchen of that house at midnight most nights for a couple months.
Yeah, but that, so we inverted our schedule, which is not it's not too unusual for people that can do that. And that was also an interesting, so we didn't it was our very first roast. So we had been waiting on our roaster. It was super delayed. We had launched this founder's sale.
Yeah, where we basically
said to friends and family,
hey, this is what we're going to offer. It's going to be like this.
And so, but it was for Christmas. So we really had been said, okay, buy everything for holiday gifts. And so we had all these orders. Yeah. No roaster, didn't know how to set the thing. I mean, we had to test it like anybody would. And so
we're going to fill every bag by hand, right, and weigh every bag by hand. And everything was going to be almost completely manual. We had bought all these things from stainless steel scoops to beautiful scales, all this kind of stuff. But the reality of it was that none of it was automated. It was all just, do it.
And we just, we didn't know how long it was going to take. It was our first go at it, and everything was delayed. So that marked the very first sale of Twin Engine coffee effectively, because that was really before we had any Nicaraguan customers. I think maybe one.
Yeah.
So leading up to that, we had needed to do quite a bit of, there are just things you just didn't know. So we were also one of the very first companies that was doing formal exports of roasted coffee. And so when I went to do the paperwork, they just didn't understand. Like they just did not understand what I was trying to export. And so I was like, no, it's roasted, which is regulated by a totally different part of the government than raw coffee. And so then, I don't know if you remember, but when we were doing registering the brand, I had no idea that there was, because you had to register a brand to be able to export it. And there was a wait. They said, oh, well, this is going to take up to 9 months. And at this point, we only had like 6 months before we needed our first sale. So there were a lot of surprises.
Yeah, it was tricky. I mean, but luckily for us, we had time. We were pretty focused on this.
Right.
I mean, I had a job sort of at the time. I mean, when we came down here, I was still an owner of a cigar magazine called Cigar Journal, and I was spending like 35-ish hours a week on that, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so that was kind of sustaining us from an income perspective. But we did have a lot of time to be able to do it. We didn't have our daughter at that point. We were just sort of focused on this.
Right. I mean, it's a good thing because we had to learn how to literally navigate where we lived in Nicaragua. There are no house addresses. So I grew up where you had a house number and a street and a town and a zip code. And so here it's in English, it's, well, where the oak tree was, or the tamarindo tree was 10 years ago, 2 blocks from there north and 1 block east. So, and then having to learn Managua. So there was just a ton of, I feel like I should have some kind of certificate. Like I have more or less mastered, driving here in a very short amount of time.
And mapping software on your phone is still not very good today, but back then it was so rudimentary. I mean, at the time you could, if you were in Europe or the United States or somewhere, you could get around using those maps, no problem.
Sure.
But here, with the addresses the way that they are, and with the lack of investment by Google and those guys in figuring out where the streets are,
yeah, it's improved substantially.
It was kind of useless.
I mean, Rome was also, or Italy in general, was just amazing maze of ancient streets, but the GPS knew exactly what was going on, and here not so much.
No, it was tough.
So that was pretty fun.
Yeah. So we got all the packaging materials in. We got the ink from Japan to start stamping the bags. We got the stamps printed by the local stamp printer. We got the graphic design done with some local designers here. We put all those things together, stamping the bags, sweating in this oven of a roastery, and then started roasting coffee.
Do you remember? So in the middle of our first roast, because that was our office. Do you remember the immigration officers? We had been here. Oh yeah, so we'd almost been here 1 whole year by that point, and so our residency was getting in process, and so here we are, just like really busting our tails trying to get this out. And so the immigration officer comes in and says, yes, we need to see all of your documents. Could you sit down? And so, of course, looking back, it was fine, but that's not a non-stressful situation because it's all in a different language. We didn't really know. And in the middle of what we were doing, it was pretty funny.
Did you feel that earthquake? We've been having earthquakes all day. Really, really light ones.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, there was a big one yesterday too. Yeah, so when we first got started, it was a slow process. And we went through so many coffees too in order to finally settle on the ones that we wanted to launch at the beginning. I have no idea how many we tasted. It was tons, and meeting all these different farmers, and then seeing the way that some people were drying their coffee was on old concrete, and when they would move the coffee around, it would break pieces of the concrete, and you'd end up, when you bought the coffee, with little pieces of broken concrete in with the coffee. And so, trying to figure out who is doing a good enough job, not only having the great tasting coffee, but ones without broken pieces of concrete in it.
Well, I mean, the last 5 years, I mean, it's a short, obviously a short period in the history of coffee, but for Nicaragua, the post-farm processing of drying and sorting has changed significantly. There's been big investment in sorters that are laser, and so you're really seeing quite a bit of advances there that weren't there, that had to be done exclusively by hand and side at the time. And I think we quickly learned that, I mean, neither one of us, we're economists, we understand these macro ideas, but realizing what it's like to be a small company on the producing side of coffee, which is heavily a big company game industry. And so what does that look like, and how to create trust? There's a lack of transparency in coffee. And I think, because coffee consumers, for the most part, well, as we know, they don't live where the coffee grows. So there's just a real lack of transparency in creating relationships now that are really based on trust, and ethics is quite important.
Yeah, because when you buy coffee from someone, you're buying a lot of coffee from someone. And so you're not there to watch every single bean go through the machine or make sure that everything you get is exactly perfect. A lot of it you find out after you've received the coffee and you get into roasting it and tasting it. You expect that it's going to be the same as when you first sampled it, but sometimes it comes out different. And so that's why, at least at the very beginning or early on, when it was a more manual human process, it was so important to build those relationships and gain the trust, or even let the person know that you're watching and that when they're stiffing you or screwing something up.
Right, because there is this romance, and people talk about the small farmer, and that those kind of ideas. But the reality is, coffee is, by and large in the world, a massive volume industry. And so if you're buying from small farmers, they also have to have control of the coffee. And so there's an economies of scale in the coffee. So you need to be able to trust that the farmer does have control, or you have control, or that both of your eyes, because that's not the typical model there. The typical model is that all size of farmers would sell to large buyers, and that they handle all the process and the selling post-farm. And so if you want to work directly with a farmer and not involve a middle processor, or that the farmer, this is a new concept, that the farmer would have control of the quality throughout the chain, just that you and the farmer, right? So I hope that is making sense. But that's where you start to see that it's not so easy, that the farmer also has to have a lot of trust with where the coffee is dried and the patios. And there's a lot of players, because there's big margins there to be had.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Or big quantities too. I mean, sometimes these big farms, they may not make that much per pound that gets sold, but they're selling so much of it that they make a living. And it's been an interesting start. Getting started was really rocky, and there are always these problems where you sort of are going to run out of bags, or you're going to run out of ink, or what have you, and making sure that you always have those things in supply.
And just by nature of working in a developing country, it's not just called online retailer.
Yeah, you can't just go on Amazon and order some more of something.
It takes a lot of planning, and our friends over the years, I hope some of our friends are listening to this, but I know that they've probably not understood when we've asked them to bring stuff, or we've become expert packers of being really efficient with our 50 pounds of luggage to bring things over, to economize on transport costs. But we have really appreciated our friends and family helping us by bringing things over the years that are really hard to find.
And all those
here.
strange things that they've had in their suitcases.
Right. I mean, everything legal, of course, but just funny things that they're wondering why, or why do you want us to bring you cheese? Yeah. Sometimes you just need some good cheddar cheese, which has become a lot more available here, but in the early days, not so much.
So that's a little bit of a background about what it was like getting started here in Nicaragua. And this is the end of Season 0, the background about Twin Engine and what it was like to start here. In Season 1, we're going to be diving deep into the world of coffee from the perspective of being in the country where the coffee grows. So check back in with us. We're going to be releasing these episodes where we talk about the creation of a blend, problems with suppliers, what it's like to be inspected by the Food and Drug Administration in your facility in a foreign country, and many, many more subjects. So we hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening.
This has been Brewing Conversation with Andrea Wolverton and Colin Ganley. Thank you for listening. For more connection to coffee and Twin Engine Coffee, go to twinenginecoffee.com or email us. We'd love to hear from you.